Hello, hello, hello. This is Chris Ferdinandi from GoMakeThings.com. And today I'm going to be answering a bunch of questions I got on a handful of my previous videos about web components. Let's get started. We'll start ticking through them one after the other. Just real quick though, if you enjoy content like this and you want to help me make more of it, the best way to do that is with a Lean Web Club membership. I recently changed the way this works so that it is now a pay what you want kind of model. The idea is you're doing it because you want to support me creating even more free content. But if you do join, you get some really cool perks, including access to my private Discord community, as well as my private or personal web dev toolkit. So this is literally the stuff that I use to build for the web every single day. So I actively use this tool. I built it for me primarily as a way to quickly access stuff that I use regularly. So I've got tons of reference guides on how to do a whole ton of stuff. I come in here and copy paste code all the time or quickly look up how to do things. A majority of the lessons and kind of overviews here even have live code sandboxes where you can play with stuff and get a sense for how it works. And then what we're going to be looking at today is my toolkit, where I literally have a bunch of boilerplates and helper functions and CSS snippets and just copy paste stuff that you can grab and run with. And so today we're going to be looking at a couple of the web components in here as we talk through some of these questions. So specifically today, we're going to be looking at flag emoji and accordion group, which are used to render a flag emoji based on the country code and create a accordion component respectively. With that out of the way, let's dig in. If you have any questions or anything you'd like me to create articles about, please, or videos rather, please leave a comment below. Feel free to chat, let me know. The whole usual thumbs up, subscribe, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Cool. Let's dig in. So the very first question I received was around the idea of HTML web components versus JavaScript rendered web components. And this came up in response to a video I had made on how to reproduce a React app as a basically as a web component. And so in that app, I guess let's talk about the difference for a second. So the traditional way that you see a lot of web components built is with just an empty element, kind of the React way. You start with an empty element, and then when the JavaScript for it loads, it's going to render some stuff into the UI. So in this case, I have the flag emoji custom element with the different country codes on it, US, Japan, Mexico, and they're empty. And when the JavaScript loads, it injects the proper emoji into the UI. It has some, let's make this way bigger. It's got some code under the hood that grabs the proper emoji for that country code and displays it in the UI. This is the way you see a lot of web components out in the wild made. The way I personally prefer to create web components is using what I call, or I guess what Jeremy Keith calls, he's the one who coined the term, HTML web components. So in this approach, you have your custom element, but you start with a baseline of existing HTML. And then when the JavaScript loads, it progressively enhances that. So let me actually comment out the JavaScript for a second. Here I have some headings and some content that goes with them. And if I were to reload this page without the JavaScript, you can see that I just have a perfectly functional chunk of code. And if we look in the inspector, let's make this a little bit bigger too. We've got some headings and some content. But as soon as I load the JavaScript on this, it gets progressively enhanced into an accordion component where the content has been changed. There's now a button there with some aria on it. The content is hidden, and then when you expand it, the aria gets updated, the content gets displayed. This is my preferred approach for web components. It makes the most sense when you have existing HTML that works with or without the JavaScript. So if the HTML makes sense without the JavaScript, I prefer to use this approach, and I'll use JavaScript to enhance it. And I also think it makes the web components easier to author. There are times, though, where you have a component that is basically functionless without the JavaScript. This flag emoji web component is a good example of that. So in that case, I don't put anything in here at all. Like I could have had the country code as text in the web component, but there's really no benefit to doing that. In fact, it potentially makes things harder. So that's kind of where I draw the divide. And in the case of the React web component, it's this tic-tac-toe game, and it is completely functionless until the JavaScript loads. I could pre-render the table and everything, but it wouldn't do anything. That would be more confusing. And because this is going to get updated in very large ways every time, every time the user interacts with it, it's easier, faster, etc., to just handle the whole thing with JavaScript, despite my love of HTML web components. The next question I got was actually around this type of thing and how you deal with the flashes of unstyled content. So in the case of a something like this, an HTML web component, if you have a bit of a delay, you will, so like in this case, everything's local, so it seems to load nearly instantly. But if I were to add a lag, so let's simulate a slow 3G network. Oh, this isn't going to work either because I'm not loading this as a server. So if I were doing this as like a server kind of thing, you would see, without any of the interactivity here, just the headings and stuff. And then when the file actually loads and renders, then everything gets hidden and it enhances. And for a component like this, I view that as just the cost of doing business. I actually think it's a much better user experience than having some content that is unusable until the JavaScript loads. So for me, the unstyled content that then gets swapped out once the JavaScript loads, that's a feature, not a bug. The nature of the content has changed, but it's perfectly usable before then. That's a good thing. For something like flag emoji, in this case, the emoji is 100% an enhancement, but there's no HTML fallback. So I would do nothing. I would just treat that exactly the way it is. It's one of those that's nice to have. If it doesn't load, it is what it is. And then for something like the tic-tac-toe board, I didn't do it here, but I would typically lean on placeholder content. So in this case, I'm just going to drop some loading text here. Here, let's comment this out for a second, right? So, what you see is loading, although I probably wouldn't do that. So in a real world situation, I'm probably going to use placeholder text. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah. So something like this, where you've got like a skeleton or framework of what it's going to look like. This does get hard coded in and then gets completely overwritten by the web component once it loads. So I would likely have something like that in here that looks like, here, let's reload this, that looks a bit like this in structure. Like maybe you've got a 2-column grid with like a line, a big square, and then another line, right? Maybe even with the number next to it, but then it all gets wiped out once the JavaScript loads. So I would do something like that here just so that users know something is coming. So different use cases, different approaches. And then 2 additional questions. So one of them was around hydration. So specifically, again, in the context of something like this, if you were to have some HTML that then gets re-rendered by the JavaScript, how do you avoid doing the same thing twice? The short answer is I don't. So if I'm going with a progressively enhanced approach here, I'm not re-rendering this UI over and over again in a state-based UI approach. I'm using old school DOM manipulation to toggle and manipulate some selected attributes. If I'm doing something like more like the React-y way of doing things, where I'm completely updating the UI based on interactions, I'm not going to have HTML in the first place that gets enhanced, I'm just going to generate the whole thing with JavaScript. And then I avoid the whole hydration aspect there. And then the last question was around styling. So what are some of the different ways you bundle styles with your web component? So full disclosure here, I tend not to bundle styles as part of the component, the way you might find in like a Vue app or a Vue component or a React component, something like that. I prefer to keep all of my HTML for my web components in the Light DOM. Let's actually see if I can find an example here. So in the case of the accordion group, for example, I'm not using the shadow DOM. I'm manipulating some existing HTML and I'm keeping it all in the Light DOM. Same thing with the flag emoji. I am injecting that as content directly into the element. It does not live in the shadow DOM. With that, I am then able to use my CSS globally the same way I would any other element on the page, and my content is going to inherit the styles. For something like the accordion group, I actually have a CSS file, and I would, if I were distributing this as like a library or something, I would include it in there, and then the user can load it however they want. They can inject it dynamically. They could just load it as part of their global style sheet. But you can see in here, I'm styling things to my web component. I'm just not loading it with the JavaScript. I'm just treating it like you would any other piece of CSS for a component. So where things get a little bit trickier is with the shadow DOM. Styling the shadow DOM is a giant pain. And so I actually have a series on how to do that over at gomakethings.com. So I will make sure there's a link to that in the description, but I cover the challenges, the different techniques you can use, and then I have separate articles on all of the different techniques, how they work, which ones I like, which ones I don't like, how you can mix and match them. And so, yeah, if you want to learn more about styling the shadow DOM, go check that out. I generally hate working with the shadow DOM for a variety of reasons, styling being one of them. But sometimes you need to do it or you're kind of locked into a system. And so if you want to learn how to do that, you can check that out over at gomakethings.com/series. I think that was it for the questions. Just again, to quickly summarize, I favor pre-rendered HTML when I can. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Flashes of unstyled content are kind of the price you pay for progressive enhancement. If you're not using progressive enhancement, it's sometimes helpful to load some sort of loading element that lets people know more is coming. I avoid hydration entirely. I pick one approach or the other, not both. And I treat my CSS for web components like you would any other type of CSS. If you like this video and you want to help me make more like it, and you're not already a member, it would be a huge help to me if you went over to leanwebclub.com and signed up for a membership. I have a ton of flexible payment options, both annual and monthly, as well as a lifetime membership. And if you join, you get a bunch of sweet perks like access to my Discord community, as well as access to my entire private web developer toolkit, which is literally what I use to develop for the web every single day. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or you want me to cover something in a future video, please leave a comment below and I will see you next time. Cheers.